Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Internationally podcast. Before we start, let me talk a little bit about the podcast. So, the Internationally podcast is going to be a space where different international students, prospective ones, as well as current international students, could get a glimpse of the life of international students in the US or abroad. This week, I am joined by my very dear friend, Feven. Welcome to the show, Feven.
Thank you for having me, Ruti.
Of course. So, a little bit about Feven. She's from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. She's currently a senior student at Seton Hall University, majoring in nursing. Do you want to add more?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up.
All right, good. So, as the title of this episode is dealing with independence, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word independence?
Okay. So before we start, I would like to say thank you for creating this amazing platform where international
Hey.
students can gain insight about what it is like to be an international student. So I think it's an amazing platform. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you so much, Feven. It means so much.
So going back to the question, I think independence can mean different things to different people, but at the core of it, I believe independence is the freedom from dependence, right? It's that state of being
I
able to
love that.
depend on yourself, to have that self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and exercise self-determination.
Wow, that should be like a quote. I'm gonna put that as a quote. That's so beautiful, honestly. Yeah. I mean, for me personally, when I hear the word independence, I think the first thought that comes to my mind, I mean, it could be from a lot of things, like you're independent financially, it could be you're independent physically, like you could be, moving to different places freely without any without any limitations to your movement.
Right.
And also independence, I think, is most often associated with some sort of responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a limit even to the amount of independence that you have. But relating it back to our college experience as an international student,
Right.
um when was the first time that you had to deal with being independent in college?
Hmm. I think there is no like specific time that I could like pick and say this is like that one time where I felt like I am that fully independent person. But for sure, just even thinking about it, like college in and of itself, regardless of where it is, it brings its own independence, right? So even if you're going to a college in your hometown and your city, I still feel like just because you're in college, now you're out of high school, where a certain
Mm-hmm.
routine was given to you by your school or by your teachers. Now you decide, when am I going to take my classes? What am I going to major in? Right?
Mm-hmm.
When am I going to do, stuff with my friends and just, go out and enjoy? When am I going to do work? If you're going to be working, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are a
Right.
lot of um, times where you're like, okay, I have to make a decision about a certain thing. But as an
Mm-hmm.
international student, I feel there's a certain layer of independence that is added to that, right? So now you're
Yeah.
literally half the world away from home, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I don't have those people around me that I depended on once upon a time, but it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you don't have people around you, motivating you or supporting you when
Right.
time comes. I think the first time I felt like I exercised independence even a little bit is when I decided to come to the US as an international student, knowing how hard it would be. That's
Mm-hmm.
probably the first time I felt like, I exercised some form of um, self determination.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think it's also similar for me too. Like, so I went to high school in the US too. So I was in North Carolina with my family. And I think one of the major decisions that I made was I was applying to schools in North Carolina because I wanted to stay closer to my family. And I think Smith and Mount Holyoke were the only two schools that I applied out of state. And I ended up finally going to Smith because they were the ones who gave me the financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think similarly, I was making a move. I was moving to a different state. Like, even though it was in the East Coast,
Right.
I would still have to take a plane to come see my family. So as you said, I mean, you had to move like a whole continent.
Mm-hmm.
Me, while I was still in the same continent, I did definitely move to a different state.
Yeah.
So I think that was also the first time that I had to deal with being independent. My next question for you is, um, were there any struggles associated with like this newfound freedom that you found in college, without the expectations or like pressures of your family, or like telling you to come back home at a certain time at night, or whatever it may be? How did you handle that abundance of freedom?
That's a great question. So just to give you a little bit of background information, I'm an only child. So being an only
Mm-hmm.
child, I think we have a leg up in terms of exercising independence. And that is because, growing up, if you're an only child, not only, will you have to creatively play around and, because you don't have brothers or sisters to play with,
Right.
you're also responsible. So personally, my parents worked full time growing up. So coming back from school, I had to make sure I did my homework, my assignments. So that
Mm-hmm.
sense of responsibility started early on for me. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't as tough as I thought it would be when I came here and started exercising independence. So, but at the same time, I want to share a story of spiritual independence that I did not see coming at all
Yes, please do.
when I applied to college, or even when I started this election process. Spiritual journey was not in my head at all. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna apply to a bunch of colleges and see what they offer, and then I'll attend one.
Right.
My family and I exercised the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo faith. So growing up, I was, my grandmother and my mother both took me to church every Sunday. So there was that routine of exercising the spiritual walk. But coming here, it was a totally different story. So the
Mm-hmm.
first month, or was it the second month? Yeah. When I came, I found out that there are two Ethiopian Orthodox churches nearby, which was like an
Mm-hmm.
amazing thing because I did not plan in terms of like what am I going to do? How is that spiritual journey going to continue? I thought it was just going to freeze for
Mm-hmm.
4 years and then, hopefully after 4 years it will
Right.
continue. So because of that, when I found out that one was like literally walking distance and the other was a couple of towns away, I was like, thank God, because
Wow.
I felt like that really grounded me throughout the 4 year experience. So the
Mm-hmm.
primary thing I did was join the church and join
Mm-hmm.
service. And luckily, during that month, the head priest was in a process of creating this small Sunday school group, or like a Bible study group, if you may say. Um,
Wow, that's nice.
and I asked him if there were any youth group that I could join. And then he said, yeah, we're like
Mm-hmm.
in the process of creating one. Would you like to join? I'm like, yes, of course. So it
Nice.
has been,
Nice.
that definitely helped me in the not only in the spiritual journey, but also academically, because, some of my good friends right now
Mm-hmm.
are within the Sunday school. So
Mm-hmm.
they have kept me accountable, not only in terms of, the spiritual process, but also academically. So, yeah, that was definitely something that I didn't see coming.
Right. That's Thank you so much, first of all, for sharing that beautiful story. And like, as you were talking, I was nodding because I was also reflecting back on my journey in college. And I'm actually planning to do a separate episode about like spirituality and how that influences our college
Right.
lives as international students, because I feel like it's a topic that deserves a discussion of its own.
Mm-hmm.
But just to share some insights, as you said, like, church has been a major part of my life as well. And but the thing is, like, my parents were always there, they're the ones who always take me and my sister to church.
Right.
But when I moved to college and my sister also transferred somewhere near me, we started going to church together, and it was just us. We like took ourselves there, because whenever I used to go visit her, because the Ethiopian church was around Boston,
Mm-hmm.
we would go to church. And that I also felt independent, because my parents, like our parents, weren't there to take us. We were finding that, I don't know, there was just this drive in us to like continue what we've been doing while we were in high school, or like before
Right.
that. um and for me personally, like how I dealt with like the newfound freedom, honestly, I experimented a lot. Like my first year, when I say experiment, it's not like in the common sense that people say, like experiment in college. That sounds like very far-fetched.
Mm-hmm.
What I meant to say was like, so for instance, I would have an assignment. Like my first year, I procrastinated a lot, and that is something that I admit, because I was like, oh, I don't have to go back to my dorm at a certain time, so I could stay with my
Right.
friends, socialize, watch a movie, and then by the time I like finally managed to go home, it would be like around midnight or something, and then I'd have to wake up early. So like I think for me, how I dealt with it was through practice, and through like seeing my failures and being like, okay, maybe I should like lessen my time with my friends and then focus more on school. But my follow-up question for you is, how did you deal with being independent, but then also like how did you learn how to manage your independence?
Yeah. So I think, to start of like saying how can you actually gain that independence, is to get to know yourself first, right? I guess everything
Mm-hmm.
starts from self-awareness, and not only about your likes and dislikes, but also your beliefs, your assumptions, and to also challenge those beliefs and assumptions about yourself, about the society. So during that process, you learn to become more assertive. You learn to start, making meeting your needs, and even making mistakes. You're also allowed to break some rules. But I think your question was, how did you
Manage your
manage
independence,
manage your
yeah.
independence, right? So for me, from the definition of it, independence is literally having that third inner parent. Think about how good
Mm-hmm.
what good parents would do for their children, right? Not only
Right.
would they just encourage them and tell them to keep going through life, they would also comfort them during difficulties, because it's going to be difficult. It's not just a very smooth road to go through, right? So once you have that self-awareness, you'll start to analyze what you would want to do in this world, right? The self-awareness will
Mm-hmm.
result
Mm-hmm.
in your ambitions and your passions. So during that process, the independence that you have, it not only becomes about like you, but also it becomes about your input to the world. So you will learn to value it so much, to the point where you're like, okay, like whatever I do today with that independence that I have, it's literally having an option to do this or that, right? Whatever those things
Right.
might be.
Right.
um, just because you have that independence, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to abuse it. And it will
Mm.
it will put you in, I guess, that mature level to start thinking about the end results. Yeah.
Right. Right. I totally agree, because as you were speaking, like I was again like nodding and like in agreement, because I also remember like my first year. I used to like, before I made any like sort of decision, I used to be like, okay, what would my dad do? What would my dad say? What would my mom say? What would my sister say? And then after I weigh all of like what I thought they
Yeah.
would say, and then I'll be like, okay, so what would I
Right.
say? And then like make that decision based on off of like, because I feel like we're like given this independence almost like in an unexpected way. Like we were never prepared for it in a way, because we were sheltered in high school, we were under our parents control, and we were living with them. We were never
Right.
responsible for like paying bills or anything. We never had to think about those things. But then once you move to college, and your parents aren't there to like take care of you when you're sick, or to give you a hug when you need it, or all of those other things that you took for
Mm-hmm.
granted while you were with them. I think like the first part of it I think first year is a very difficult year for a lot of international students, especially
Yeah.
because they live really far away from home. And once, I also think it depends on the level of, closeness that you have with your family, obviously.
Right.
But, for someone who's like very close to their family and like siblings, it could be a very difficult time. So my next question for you is, how is that for you? Like, were you close with your family? Like, would you, like me, would you like ask yourself, okay, what would my parents do? What would, like, what kind of decisions am I supposed to make here, because there's nobody around you to tell you what to do because you're independent,
A
supposedly.
lot. Because like I said, being an only child, not only was I attached to my parents, I was also extremely attached to my grandmother. So it was like I when I came, I remember I was like, okay, Feven, I don't know how you're gonna do this, or are you sure? Is this like the right fit for you? You know. So it was not only
Mm-hmm.
was it difficult for me, it was also difficult for my parents to let. It's kind of like not let go, but now you're in a completely different continent. They can't just come and get
Right.
you, right. That reminds
Mm-hmm.
me of a conversation I had with a family friend freshman year when I went back home for that summer break. We were just sitting down,
Mm-hmm.
and she told me, "Hey, Faven, I think your mom." She specifically talked about my mom. She said, "Your mom is so selfless," and it was a random statement. And I was like, okay, thanks, but what do you mean?" And she said, "I have 3 children, and as a mother, I would never let them go away even to like the next state or whatever, because I would probably
Mm-hmm.
think about myself so much, and the amount of worries I would go through for them to achieve their dreams or for them to become who they want to become." And that really
Mm-hmm.
said a lot about my mom and also my parents in general, because it's not easy. We're not parents yet,
Yeah.
so we might not understand it to the level they do, but I still
Yeah.
can empathize and understand um, how hard it must have been for them to be like, okay, go pursue your dream. We'll just wait here. So
I love
yeah,
that.
so yeah,
Yeah.
there were times I will definitely call my mom and my dad and say like, what should I do, like, is this the right thing to do? But my
Mm-hmm.
both of my parents early on taught me how to see it from my point of view. Of course, ask for help when I
Mm-hmm.
do need it, but my dad always says, Faven, if you succeed in life, you're the first person to be really happy and satisfied with what you have done. Of course, we'll be happy as your parents, but the first person who's going to be happy is you. At the same time, if you do fail,
Right.
you're the first person to really feel the you know that situation, because as parents, obviously they're gonna feel sad and sorry for me, but the person himself or herself is the first individual that is going to face the challenges. So that being said, I felt like at a certain point, yeah, like my parents are there if I need them, but most of the
Mm-hmm.
decisions that I make throughout life, they're going to reflect my values and my, beliefs. At the same time, it might not be necessarily right or necessarily wrong, but whatever they are, it's going to be a learning process regardless.
Right, right. And I really like that because you also reflected on what your independence meant for your parents as well, because we usually tend to think of it as like, this is me, I'm independent, I'm like this. So, we tend to think of like our own individual journeys, and we kind of forget, like, whenever we go to college, it's like everybody's going to college
Right.
with us, like, even though they're not there physically, they are living life through us. And I think one of the things that I'm very grateful for is like
Mm-hmm.
technology, and like how we could call them and like FaceTime or like video chat. Because back in the day, like when students were going abroad, like they couldn't even contact
Yeah.
their families for an extended period of time. So definitely that's something that I've been very grateful of while I was in college, because they were just a call away,
Right.
so that made it definitely easier. But going back to the topic of independence, I agree. Like, because when I went to Smith, my sister was still in North Carolina attending another school there before she transferred to Boston. And so I was the first one to leave the nest. I was the first one to be like, okay, bye, I'm going to another college. And then I remember when I came back for Christmas break, it was just like, so wow, so one of the things that made me realize that I was independent, which I want to talk about, is
Right.
financial independence. Because I remember that first Christmas break, I used the money from my work study to buy my plane ticket. And that
Wow.
was like a big
Yeah.
move for me because I didn't have to ask my parents for money because I was working in college. And they were very proud of me. I was very proud of myself too because I was able to
Mm-hmm.
finance my travels. So that was a huge step, and that, like, I was gradually learning about like how to manage my money, how to budget, how to be financially
Right.
secure, all these things. But they require obviously practice, and you make a few mistakes here and there. But I think the financial aspect of it, I really want to discuss with you.
Yeah,
How
for
is that for
sure.
you?
I mean, so the financial aspect was a bit tough, like you said, because first of all, as an international student, you don't have a lot of job options. You're only allowed to work on campus
Yeah.
a certain hour. There are
Hmm.
multiple
Visa implications.
criterias, right? So
Yes,
I
for
only
sure.
lived on campus for the first semester. So moving on from the second semester of
Okay.
freshman year, I lived off campus. So basically, I looked for a place to stay, and then I, rented a place basically and started paying my monthly rent. And that's
Wow. Look at you doing adult
adult
things.
things, right?
Yes.
For sure, yeah. That was the first time, actually, going
Mm-hmm.
back to your first question. The second time, I would say, is when I decided to move off campus to a place, and I'm still living here, living there, and it's been a home away
Mm-hmm.
from home for sure. But going back to the
Mm-hmm.
financial discussion, yeah, because you know not only is it difficult to manage the money you have made, for us it was also difficult to make money, literally, like, to find a job. So it was very difficult to find a job on campus. But once I did, I was very lucky to have worked in the same office for almost 3 years. And um, yeah,
Wow.
so after that, it was, like you said, it's a learning process. For the first few months, I wasn't sure how to manage the money, how to, make sure that I pay rent on time, and just manage the entirety of it. So it definitely took me a while.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it's a learning process. And
Right.
once you know your needs, you'll start to differentiate your needs and
Mm-hmm.
wants, for sure. So it
Exactly.
throughout
Exactly.
that process,
Yeah.
yeah, at the end of it, you'll probably come out, yeah.
Yeah. For sure. I also relate to what you said about like these restrictions of trying to find a job that doesn't violate your visa status as an F1 student in the US, that doesn't go over the limited 20 hours per week
Right.
that you have to work. Because as a first year, I remember in my college, the only jobs is available for first years was dishwashing jobs.
Wow.
And so that was my first job ever. That was the first job I had. I didn't work in high school. I mean, some people do, but I personally didn't. And so the first job I ever had was when I was a first year,
Mm-hmm.
as a dishwashing job. I took my job
Yeah.
so seriously. Like, I was like, yes, okay, this is like my job. I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna get paid. And I think at that time the minimum wage was $9 per hour. I think it went up to like 11 or 12 by the time I graduated. But that was like my first paycheck. Funny story I want to share here is so when we first go to campus, I'm sure there's the international students peer orientation where they give us an orientation specifically geared
Yeah.
towards international students. So on one of the days of that orientation, the activity was to go downtown Bank of America to get
Mm-hmm.
to open a bank account. So me along with my friends, we just go. And we're like, okay, let's open a bank account, and then I fill in like date of birth and stuff. So
Yeah.
I was 17. So the lady came and she was like, excuse me, you're not 18.
Yeah.
You're not legally allowed to have a bank account. And I was just like, what? And she's like, when's your birthday? I said, sometime in September. She was like, and that was August. So she's like, okay, come back after a month and then we'll open it for you then. And I was just like, oh, okay. I was very disappointed because every single of my friends had
Yeah.
gotten their bank account except me. But then the turnaround was, so I had worked though, you know, so I had worked for that 2 weeks. So I
Mm-hmm.
missed that paycheck because obviously I didn't have a bank account that they could deposit it to. So then after my birthday, I went opened a bank account. So by the time I got my paycheck, it was worth 4 weeks of work rather than 2 weeks of work
Yeah.
that my friends were doing. So you know, I had a
Yeah.
big sum, and I was just like, wow, okay, I could learn how to do this. But as you said, like, you know, it it definitely isn't for everybody, you know, like it really humbles you. I really want to say, because you know, some people might think like, you know, dishwashing is like a inferior job or something, but I
Mm-hmm.
took it very seriously. And I remember my boss, she was like really really nice. She's like, you know, you Ethiopians are very hard workers. He was like, you take your
Yeah.
jobs very serious and you're always studying yourself. And I was like, wow, okay. I took pride in that because I was raised to like
Right.
respect every single job, and as long as it was paying, um you know, was giving me money, I should respect it as a job. So I understand, like, you know, a lot of opportunities aren't open for
Mm-hmm.
international students to look for jobs, but like as second year and third year, there were more opportunities that
Yeah.
opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any stories
No, I
that you
think
want to
you're
share?
right, especially with regards to, having respect for any type of job you are doing, because at that point in time there's some necessity driving you. So for me, when I, rented
Mm-hmm.
the my room, I was like, okay, I need to make it in a month to pay this rent. So like, regardless of what kind of job, I don't care, I really need this money. So when necessity drives you, you just have to move forward. There's no other choice. Not only that, but like you said, it's like growing up, I'm sure your parents also taught you that you'll have, respect for any
Mm-hmm.
type of job, as long as you're not just you're not destructing, right? So, yeah, I agree.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. um One other point I think, or aspect that I wanted to raise, like in regards to independence, is, do you think you could have like too much independence, or like how do you draw the line of like saying, okay, I'm like, because you mentioned earlier of like, you know, abusing your independence, like how do you draw the line of like being a
Hmm.
responsible young adult, and trying to, you know, use your time
Yeah.
effectively, use your money effectively, but then like, when do you go overboard? How do you see that happening?
Okay. So I think it's definitely different for, everyone. But for me, there are certain things, especially in college, there are certain things that are not optional, like your classes, right? Going to
Mm-hmm.
going
Mm-hmm.
to each and every class as much as you can, submitting your homework, your assignments on time, and also work for me was not optional. But just making sure, like, you're here for college, you're here for a certain thing, there's an end goal to it, right? A degree or a job, whatever it might be at the
Mm-hmm.
end. So definitely not, uh, making sure that you fulfill the required amount of work every week towards your classes and your college or your work, but at the same time having fun. Because for me, one thing looking back that I would advise myself at 17, 18 is to actually make time to have fun, and just be with your
Mm-hmm.
friends. Because I remember there was a time in, I
Mm-hmm.
believe it was my sophomore year, because I'm a nursing major. I have my clinical days and my
Mm-hmm.
classes at the same time I worked. So it was like I never went out with my friends. I remember sophomore year and the beginning of junior year. So now when I look back at it, like, I don't have any memories that I could talk about in freshman year and sophomore year. But thankfully, junior year and senior year,
Right.
although it is harder, I made the decision to consciously say, okay, like, I'm gonna take the day off and I'm just gonna, go out with my
Mm-hmm.
friends or have fun. So yeah, I think not forgetting what you're here for and making sure you meet the expected work towards your end goal, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time also taking a break and, utilizing that independence to have fun and,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you raised because, as you said, like with being, as I said around the beginning, like with being independent, there comes a responsibility. And I think that responsibility, like we owe it to ourselves, as you said, to to find that balance,
Right.
although it could be very difficult between your academic life and your social life. Because it's been almost 2 years
Mm-hmm.
since I graduated now, and some of the fondest memories that I have of college is with my friends. The time that we spent together, the quality times, the places that we've been to. Um, it's not it's not the grade that I
Right.
got in a specific class. Like that really doesn't matter as much. And that's not to say like you shouldn't perform well. Obviously, school is important, but as you said, with that independence, you have to also be responsible to fulfill not only your academic goals but also your social goals, because what's the point of college if you're not enjoying both, if you're not doing both? So I think especially as international students, we're kind
Yeah.
of harsher on ourselves, that I've seen, because we're not kind to ourselves. We don't give ourselves a break. We tend to be very career focused. Okay, what's my next internship, or like what's my next job application, or what
Yeah.
classes am I going to take? I need to be involved in all these extracurriculars, and we put a lot of expectations to excel academically. But then we forget that there are also other parts, aspects of college that we need to enjoy, because we're
Yeah.
not going to
Yeah.
get it
I
again.
agree completely.
Yeah. So as we're ending this conversation, what advice do you have for, I guess, prospective international students, or for current international students who are dealing with the topic of
Yeah.
independence?
Yeah, so I guess my advice would be to get to know yourself first. So self-awareness is key,
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, challenging your beliefs and assumptions. And
Mm-hmm.
also try to see the positive side of it, because as hard as it could be, there are also some, amazing sides to it. You despite the fact that it's, a tough road to go through, um
Mm-hmm.
the perspective you'll gain coming out, you'll have an understanding not only about yourself, not only about the people you've met, but also about yourself. For me, this is
Mm-hmm.
so I live around New Jersey, New York area, which is, I could call New York like a little earth, or if that is a phrase. You get to meet a lot of people from
Right,
every
right,
corner of the globe, meaning you'll be able to discover new
right.
cultures, you'll get to meet new people. So the whole immersion process is, it completely changed the way you look at the world. So my advice would
Totally
be
agree.
is to be open-minded, and definitely
Mm-hmm.
go out and be a risk taker, challenge yourself, your beliefs, and yeah, make the best of it, and it will definitely push you to your limits.
Well said, well said. I could not agree more, honestly. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said. I would just add that, like, with being independent in college, especially like if you're coming from a family that that has been very protective, or that you haven't really experienced having to take care of yourself by yourself without anybody around you, it could definitely be
Yeah.
a challenge at first. But you shouldn't expect that everything is going to be smooth and like it's going to be an easy ride.
Yeah.
There's going to be bumps along the way, and I think that's part of life, because that's how you learn. I'm a very big believer in like making mistakes and like
Mm-hmm.
failures teaching us how to be better. So like especially as first years, I think like that's the year that you get to, it's a trial and error year, because right after high school you transition into like this new place, and like you're learning, okay, what time should
Right.
I go back home, what time should I go out, what time should I spend with my friends, what time should I watch a movie, what time should I go to the library to study.
Right.
So all these things they relate a lot to time management, but they also relate to being independent, because you don't really have anybody that you have to answer
Right.
to, except yourself. So I agree with what you said about like challenging yourself and being open-minded, but you also need to set a certain standard and discipline to yourself, so then you don't get lost in the way and like all the fusses of college life, because college has
Yeah.
a lot of distractions, as you know. So I think it's a lot of responsibility, especially as international students. We owe it to ourselves to really see the opportunities
Right.
that serve us best and do what we
Yeah,
think
for sure.
is
I
good for
agree.
us. Yeah. Any other thing that you want to add before we
I
close?
guess like one last thing I would say is from being independent, definitely you will have a skill set of creatively solving your problems, because obviously you'll face problems, but the thing about it is you'll understand that there are multiple ways to approach a problem, and that skill set, not only will
Mm-hmm.
it be great for yourself, but also in the career path you're going through, whatever career path you're in, you'll make sure, I mean, you'll
Right.
utilize the skill set of creatively solving problem. So yeah.
That's awesome. And with that, we end this wonderful conversation about, the topic of independence. Thank you so much, Feven, for agreeing to be my guest. This was really wonderful.
Thank
I
you for
hope you
having
enjoyed
me.
it as well. Of course, just as the last housekeeping, I just want to make sure for everybody who, please make sure to go follow the official Instagram page at Internationally by Ruth. That is LIE. And please send an email with questions and concerns that you have about being an international student to internationallybyruth@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in today. I hope you have a lovely week and take care of yourselves, everybody. Bye.